Jack Sullivan froze mid-step on his cabin porch, the steaming coffee mug slipping from his weathered fingers and shattering against the wooden boards. There, not 20 feet away, in the misty Olympic forest dawn, stood a massive black bear, and she was crying. Real tears streamed down her dark fur as she held something precious and still in her massive jaws. Emma's scream pierced the mountain air from inside the cabin, followed by the crash of her breakfast plate hitting the kitchen floor. The bear's ears twitched at the sound, but she didn't retreat. Instead, her ancient, almost human eyes locked onto Jack's with desperate intensity. This wasn't the angry sow he'd treated for infected wounds 3 summers ago, the one who'd charged him with protective fury. This was a mother, holding her dying cub, her massive frame trembling with grief that transcended species. "Sweet Jesus," Jack whispered, his veterinarian instincts warring with 30 years of wilderness safety training. What kind of desperation drives a wild mother to seek help from the very creatures she's learned to fear? And why did her eyes hold a plea that felt disturbingly, impossibly human? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Jack Sullivan had always believed that broken hearts ran in families, passed down like blue eyes or stubborn streaks. At 62, he carried more than his fair share. His wife Sarah lost to cancer 2 years prior. His son Michael to an IED in Afghanistan 3 years before that. The only light left in his darkened world was his 16-year-old granddaughter Emma, who'd come to live with him after her parents died in a car accident 5 years ago. Their small wildlife rescue station sat nestled in the Olympic National Forest like a forgotten prayer, 20 miles from the nearest neighbor and 40 from town. Jack had built it with his own hands 30 years ago, back when Sarah was alive and the world still made sense. The wooden cabin served as both home and veterinary clinic, equipped with everything needed to mend broken wings and heal wounded paws. It had been Sarah's dream, a place where damaged creatures could find sanctuary. These days, Jack moved through the morning routine like a ghost haunting his own life. Every dawn began the same way: coffee with Sarah's photograph on the kitchen table, checking the handful of recovering animals in the back kennels, and pretending he wasn't slowly dying inside. Emma helped when she could, but school and the normal concerns of teenage life kept her busy. Jack preferred it that way. No sense in his granddaughter inheriting his particular brand of sorrow. The rescue station had seen better days. Funding grew tighter each year, donations fewer. Jack's veterinary practice in town had dwindled to almost nothing as younger vets took over. Some nights, lying alone in the bed he'd shared with Sarah for 35 years, he wondered if it might be time to sell the place and move Emma somewhere with more opportunities, somewhere that didn't echo with so many memories. But this morning felt different. The October air carried an unusual stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Jack had woken before dawn with an inexplicable restlessness, the kind Sarah used to call his sixth sense. She'd always teased him about it, how he could predict which animals would arrive at their doorstep before they appeared, sensing their pain across the miles. Emma was in the kitchen making breakfast, her auburn hair catching the early light streaming through the windows. She looked so much like Sarah at that age that sometimes it physically hurt Jack to look at her. The girl had her grandmother's gentle way with wounded creatures and her grandfather's stubborn determination to save everything that crossed their path. "Granddad, you're staring again," Emma said without turning around, scrambling eggs with practiced ease. "Grandmother's picture isn't going anywhere." Jack smiled despite himself. The kid was too perceptive for her own good. "Just thinking about how proud she'd be of you, sweetheart." "She'd be proud of both of us," Emma replied, setting a plate in front of him. "Even if we are a couple of stubborn old fools living in the middle of nowhere talking to animals all day." That's when Jack heard it, a sound that would change everything. The soft whimper of something dying, The sound came again, a pitiful mewling that spoke of pain beyond words. Jack pushed back from the breakfast table, his chair scraping against the wooden floor as every instinct honed by 3 decades of veterinary practice kicked in. Emma looked up from her eggs, fork suspended midway to her mouth. "You hear that?" Jack asked, already moving toward the front door. "Something's hurt," Emma whispered, setting down her fork and following her grandfather. "It sounds like a baby." Jack's hand hesitated on the door handle. In 30 years of running the rescue station, he'd seen plenty of desperate mothers bring their young for help. Deer with injured fawns, raccoons carrying babies blinded by infection, even a cougar once with cubs too weak to walk. But something about this morning felt different. The forest had gone completely silent except for that heartbreaking cry. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, expecting to see perhaps a fox or coyote mother waiting at the tree line. What he saw instead defied everything he thought he knew about wild animal behavior. The black bear stood in his yard like a monument to desperation. She was massive, at least 300 pounds, with thick, glossy fur that caught the morning light. But it was her posture that stopped Jack cold. She wasn't aggressive or defensive. She was pleading. Tears, actual tears, tracked down her dark muzzle as she held something small and limp in her jaws. Her great head was lowered in what could only be described as supplication, and when her eyes met Jack's, he saw something that would haunt him forever, the unmistakable look of a mother who had exhausted every other option. The coffee mug slipped from Jack's nerveless fingers, exploding against the porch boards in a shower of ceramic and hot liquid. Behind him, Emma's sharp intake of breath was followed by the crash of her breakfast plate hitting the kitchen floor. "Granddad," Emma breathed, her voice barely audible. Is she crying?" The bear's ears twitched at the sound, but she didn't move away. Instead, she took a careful step forward, her massive paws making no sound on the forest floor. With infinite gentleness, she lowered her head and placed her burden on the wooden steps of Jack's porch. It was a cub, no more than 6 months old, with fur as black as his mother's, but dulled by injury and exhaustion. The little body was utterly still, except for the faint rise and fall of shallow breathing. Dried blood matted the fur around one ear, and his left hind leg lay at an unnatural angle. The mother bear backed away 3 steps and sat down heavily, her eyes never leaving Jack's face. It was a gesture of trust so profound, so completely contrary to every survival instinct bred into her kind, that Jack felt his worldview shift beneath his feet. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, his veterinarian's mind cataloging injuries while his heart struggled to process what he was witnessing. She brought him to us. She actually brought him to us for help. Emma appeared beside him, her teenage bravado crumbling at the sight of the tiny patient. "Granddad, he's barely breathing. His chest is hardly moving." Jack nodded, already calculating what they'd need. Towels, the heating pad, IV fluids, antibiotics. But first, he had to get past the 300-pound mother who'd just entrusted him with the most precious thing in her world. Moving slowly, telegraphing every motion, Jack descended the porch steps. The mother bear's muscles tensed, but she didn't rise. Her dark eyes tracked his movement with laser intensity, ready to react to any threat. "Easy, Mama," Jack murmured in the same gentle tone he'd used with frightened animals for decades. "I'm going to help him. I promise." When Jack knelt beside the cub, the mother bear made a sound deep in her chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a whimper. It was the sound of a heart breaking in real time. Jack had heard it before, from human parents in hospital waiting rooms. The cub was worse off than he'd initially thought. Besides the obvious injuries, his tiny body was cold to the touch and dangerously dehydrated. But as Jack carefully lifted the small form, he felt the flutter of a heartbeat against his palm. weak but steady. "You're not giving up," Jack told the unconscious cub, "and neither am I." The mother bear watched as Jack carried her baby toward the cabin. At the threshold, Jack turned back to her, this wild creature who had somehow known that compassion could exist between species. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for trusting me." As if she understood, the great bear settled herself at the edge of the yard, positioning herself where she could watch the cabin. She was prepared to wait as long as it took. Inside the cabin, with Emma gathering supplies and the cub fighting for every breath, Jack began the most important case of his career. Jack spread towels across the examination table in his makeshift clinic, his hands steady despite the gravity of the situation. The cub's breathing was so shallow it was barely visible, and his small body felt frighteningly cold against Jack's palms. Emma hovered nearby, anticipating his needs with the intuition she'd developed from years of helping at the rescue station. "IV fluids first," Jack murmured, more to himself than to Emma. "He's severely dehydrated. Then we'll assess the injuries." As he worked, checking the cub's vitals and starting an IV line into the tiny forearm, Jack's trained eye caught something that made his blood run cold. Along the cub's rib cage, partially hidden by matted fur, was a surgical scar, clean, precise, and far too recent to have healed naturally in the wild. "Emma, hand me the clippers," Jack said quietly, his voice tight with concern. "What is it, Granddad?" Jack carefully shaved away the fur around the scar, revealing what looked like professional veterinary work. But it wasn't just the surgery that troubled him. Embedded beneath the skin, clearly visible on his portable X-ray machine, was a small metallic object. "That's a tracking chip," Emma breathed, peering over his shoulder. "But why would a wild bear cub have a tracking chip?" Before Jack could answer, the sound of vehicles approaching echoed from outside. Through the window, he saw two black SUVs pulling into his driveway, their government license plates clearly visible. The mother bear rose to her feet, positioning herself between the vehicles and the cabin, her ears flattened against her head. A man in an expensive suit emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by two others in tactical gear. Jack recognized the first man immediately, though he wished he didn't. "Dr. Wade Morrison," Jack said grimly. "What's he doing here?" Emma frowned. "Isn't he that researcher you used to work with? The one who chose money over ethics," Jack finished. "Stay with the cub, Emma. Don't let anyone near him." Jack stepped onto the porch to find Morrison approaching with confident strides, seemingly unbothered by the massive bear standing in his path. The mother bear's lips pulled back in a warning snarl, but Morrison merely gestured to his companions, who raised tranquilizer rifles. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Jack called out. "She's protecting her young. You make one wrong move and she'll tear you apart before you can blink." Morrison smiled, the same charming expression that had once made him popular at veterinary conferences. "Hello, Jack. I see you found something that belongs to me." "Nothing here belongs to you, Wade. This is a wildlife rescue station, and that cub needs medical attention." "Actually, Jack, you're mistaken." Morrison pulled out an official-looking document. "That cub is part of a federally funded research project. He's been missing for 3 days, and I'm here to collect him." Jack felt his jaw clench. "Research project? Wade, that animal is barely 6 months old, and he's been surgically altered. What kind of research requires operating on baby bears?" "The classified kind," Morrison replied smoothly. "Now, I need you to hand over the cub immediately. This is a matter of national security." "National security?" Jack laughed bitterly. "Since when does national security involve torturing wildlife?" Morrison's facade cracked slightly. "You always were naive, Jack. This research could revolutionize wildlife management. A few sacrifices are necessary for the greater good." "Sacrifices?" Jack stepped down from the porch. anger overriding caution. That cub was dying, Wade. His mother, a wild bear, brought him to me because she somehow knew I'd help. Do you have any idea how extraordinary that is? Maternal instincts in animals can be quite strong, Morrison said dismissively. It doesn't change the fact that the animal is government property. Behind Jack, the screen door creaked open, and Emma appeared, her face pale but determined. "Granddad, I looked up that serial number from the chip. The research project was shut down 6 months ago for ethical violations." Morrison's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're interfering with federal business, young lady. That's a serious crime." "So is animal cruelty," Emma shot back. "I also found some interesting articles about missing wildlife across 3 states, all traced back to a company you're involved with." Jack felt pieces clicking together in his mind, the surgical scar, the tracking chip, Morrison's desperate urgency to retrieve the cub. This wasn't about research at all. "You're trafficking them," Jack said quietly. "Wild animals for private collectors." "That's what this is really about." Morrison's hand moved toward his jacket, but the mother bear's warning growl froze him in place. She had moved closer during their conversation, and now stood directly between Morrison and the cabin. "I'm giving you one last chance, Jack," Morrison said, his voice losing all pretense of friendliness. "Hand over the cub, or I'll have you arrested for interfering with federal agents and harboring stolen government property." "Those men aren't federal agents," Emma called from the porch. "Real federal agents don't drive unmarked vehicles with fake license plates." Jack smiled grimly. His granddaughter had always been too smart for her own good. "You heard her, Wade. Time for you to leave." Morrison's face flushed with anger. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Jack. That cub is worth more than your little rescue operation will ever see. I'll be back with real authorities, and when I am, you'll lose everything. The station, custody of your granddaughter, your veterinary license, everything." As Morrison and his men retreated to their vehicles, the mother bear remained vigilant, not moving until the SUVs disappeared down the mountain road. Only then did she settle back into her watching position, her intelligent eyes meeting Jack's with what looked almost like gratitude. Inside the cabin, the cub's breathing had strengthened slightly, but Jack knew this was just the beginning. Morrison would be back, and next time he might have real legal authority behind him. The fight for the cub's life had become something much larger, a battle for justice itself. The next 4 days transformed Jack's quiet rescue station into the center of a storm that would reach far beyond the Olympic Mountains. Word of the bear mother's desperate plea had spread through the small mountain community like wildfire, and by the second day, trucks and cars began appearing on the winding forest road. Neighbors, reporters, and curious visitors drawn by a story that seemed to defy everything they thought they knew about wild animals. The cub, whom Emma had named Kodiak, showed remarkable resilience. His breathing had stabilized, and the infection from his injuries was responding to antibiotics. But it was his behavior that truly amazed everyone who witnessed it. Unlike any wild animal Jack had treated in 30 years, Kodiak seemed to understand that he was safe. When Emma sat beside his recovery kennel, reading homework aloud, the cub would lift his head and listen with obvious attention. When Jack approached with medications, Kodiak didn't struggle or try to hide. Instead, he would extend his injured paw as if offering it for treatment. "Granddad, look at this," Emma called from the clinic on the 3rd morning. She was sitting cross-legged beside Kodiak's kennel, and the cub was gently touching her hand through the wire mesh. "He knows we're helping him." Jack watched in amazement as Kodiak carefully wrapped his tiny paws around Emma's fingers, not with the desperate grip of a frightened animal, but with something that looked remarkably like affection. "I've never seen anything like it," he admitted. "It's like he understands that we're not just treating his injuries. We're protecting him." Outside, the mother bear maintained her vigil with unwavering patience. Local residents had started leaving food for her at the edge of the property, and she accepted these offerings with dignified grace. Grace Mitchell, the 70-year-old matriarch of the mountain community, had organized shifts of volunteers to ensure the bear was never approached too closely, but was provided for during her wait. "That Mama knows something special is happening here," Grace told Jack as they watched the bear from the kitchen window. "40 years I've lived in these mountains, and I've never seen a wild animal trust humans like this." But the peace was fragile. On the third day, Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived with news that made Jack's stomach clench with dread. "Jack, I've got federal marshals calling my office," Tom said, settling his large frame into one of the kitchen chairs. "Morrison's got lawyers claiming that Cub has stolen federal property. They're talking about raids, seizures, the whole 9 yards." Emma looked up from where she was preparing Kodiak's afternoon feeding. "Can they do that? Just take him away?" Tom's weathered face was grim. "If they've got the right paperwork, they can do just about anything they want. Jack, you need to know, Morrison's got connections, real ones. There are people in Washington who owe him favors." Jack felt the familiar weight of helplessness that had plagued him since Sarah's death. How could he fight the federal government? How could one old veterinarian stand against the kind of power Morrison seemed to wield? But Emma had other ideas. That evening she emerged from her room with her laptop and a determined expression that reminded Jack painfully of his late wife. "I've been doing research," she announced, setting the computer on the kitchen table. "Morrison's research project was shut down for animal cruelty violations. But look at this. The company he works for now has contracts with private zoos and exotic animal collectors across the country." Jack leaned over to examine the screen, reading through financial records and shipping manifests that Emma had somehow managed to access. "How did you find all this?" "Social media is more powerful than people realize, Granddad. I posted Kodiak's story on every platform I could find, and people started sharing their own experiences. Look." Emma clicked through a series of posts, each telling a similar story. Rare animals disappearing from wild habitats, mysterious research projects, families who had lost beloved pets to men in official-looking vehicles. One post stopped Jack cold. A photograph showed a young woman holding a golden eagle, tears streaming down her face. The caption read, "They took Thunder last month. Said he was part of a federal study. I know Morrison's company sold him to a private collector in Dubai." Save Kodiak. Stop wildlife trafficking. "Emma, this is bigger than just Kodiak," Jack breathed. "Morrison's running an entire network." "I know," Emma replied, "and I think that's exactly why we can save him." By the fourth day, Emma's social media campaign had exploded across the internet. Save Kodiak was trending nationally, and news crews from major networks were calling constantly. The story had captured something deeper than just sympathy for an injured animal. It had touched a nerve about trust, corruption, and the bonds between species that transcended understanding. Grace Mitchell proved to be a formidable ally. The elderly woman had connections throughout the region, and she used every one of them. Local businesses donated supplies for Kodiak's care. A retired federal wildlife officer named Pete Hawkins drove up from Seattle with boxes of legal documents that cast serious doubt on Morrison's claims. Most importantly, Grace organized a round-the-clock watch of volunteers to ensure Morrison couldn't simply take Kodiak by force. "That boy's become a symbol," Grace told Jack as they watched Emma give an interview to a CNN reporter. "People are seeing something pure in this story, something that reminds them why they started caring about wild things in the first place." The interview was remarkable. Emma, poised beyond her 16 years, spoke eloquently about Kodiak's intelligence and the extraordinary trust his mother had shown. But it was when she brought the reporter to see Kodiak that the true magic happened. The cub, now strong enough to sit up and take notice of visitors, looked directly into the camera with bright, alert eyes. When Emma offered him her hand, Kodiak gently grasped her fingers and held them, not with desperation, but with what could only be described as friendship. "This isn't just about one bear," Emma told the national audience. "This is about whether we're going to let people like Morrison destroy the trust that exists between humans and the natural world. Kodiak's mother believed we could help. Are we going to prove her right?" The segment aired that evening, and by morning, Jack's phone was ringing non-stop. Donations poured in from across the country. Legal aid organizations offered their services. Wildlife advocacy groups promised support. Most surprisingly, several former employees of Morrison's research program came forward with evidence of illegal activities. But Morrison wasn't giving up without a fight. On the evening of the fourth day, as Jack was conducting Kodiak's final examination before bedtime, Emma burst into the clinic with her phone in her hand. "Granddad, we have a problem. Morrison just posted on social media claiming that Kodiak is carrying a dangerous pathogen and needs to be quarantined immediately for public safety." Jack felt his blood run cold. It was a brilliant move, one that would give Morrison legal justification to seize Kodiak while painting Jack and Emma as reckless endangers of public health. "He's lying," Jack said firmly. "I've run every test in the book. Kodiak is completely healthy." "I know that and you know that, but it doesn't matter," Emma replied, scrolling through her phone. "He's already got news outlets picking up the story. People are starting to panic." Outside, Jack could see the mother bear rising to her feet, her posture alert and tense. She seemed to sense that something was wrong, that the fragile peace of the past 4 days was about to be shattered. As if summoned by Emma's words, the sound of vehicles approached through the forest. But this time, Morrison had come prepared for war. Jack counted at least 6 official vehicles, complete with hazmat suits and animal control equipment. "Emma, get Kodiak ready for transport," Jack said quietly. "If Morrison wants him, he's going to have to fight the entire community for him." Outside, Grace Mitchell's volunteers were already forming a human chain around the cabin, their faces grim with determination. The mother bear had positioned herself at the front of the group, as if she understood that this was the moment that would determine her cub's fate. The final battle for Kodiak was about to begin. The convoy of official vehicles rolled to a stop in Jack's driveway like an invading army, their headlights cutting through the evening shadows with cold precision. Morrison stepped out of the lead SUV wearing a hazmat suit and carrying a briefcase full of what appeared to be legal documents. Behind him came a team of animal control officers, veterinarians in protective gear, and 2 men who looked distinctly like federal agents. Grace Mitchell's volunteers had formed a protective semicircle around the cabin, their faces illuminated by the harsh glare of the vehicle lights. There were at least 30 people now. Neighbors, supporters who had driven hours to be here, and even some of the reporters who had come to cover the story and found themselves emotionally invested in its outcome. At the center of the group, the mother bear stood like a furry sentinel, her massive frame radiating protective fury. Morrison approached with measured steps, speaking through a portable megaphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand your concern for this animal, but you need to understand the gravity of the situation. The bear cub is carrying a pathogen that could pose a serious threat to human health and local wildlife populations. We need to remove him immediately for quarantine and testing." "That's a lie, and you know it," Emma shouted from the cabin porch, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "My grandfather has run every test available. Kodiak is completely healthy." Morrison's amplified voice remained maddeningly calm. I'm afraid a small rural clinic doesn't have the sophisticated equipment necessary to detect the specific pathogen we're dealing with. This is a matter of public safety that supersedes local authority. Jack emerged from the cabin carrying Kodiak in his arms. The cub was alert and calm, his bright eyes taking in the tense scene around him without apparent fear. A collective murmur ran through the crowd of supporters as they saw the small bear, so obviously healthy and at peace in Jack's protective embrace. "You want him?" Jack called out, his voice carrying 30 years of moral authority. "You'll have to go through every single person here, including his mother." As if summoned by his words, the mother bear took 3 deliberate steps forward, positioning herself directly between Morrison's team and the cabin. Her meaning was unmistakable. No one would take her cub without going through her first. Morrison gestured to his animal control team, and several officers raised tranquilizer rifles. The crowd of supporters immediately closed ranks, linking arms in a human chain that surrounded both Jack and the mother bear. The tension in the air was so thick it felt electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Dr. Morrison," called out a voice from the back of the crowd. Pete Hawkins, the retired federal wildlife officer, pushed forward with a folder of documents in his hand. "I've been reviewing your claims, and I have some serious questions about your authority here." Morrison's confident demeanor flickered for the first time. "Who are you?" "Retired Federal Wildlife Service, 32 years, Pete replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. "I've reviewed the paperwork for your so-called research project, and frankly, it stinks. Your permits were revoked 6 months ago for animal welfare violations. You have no legal authority to be here." "The situation has changed," Morrison replied through gritted teeth. "This is now a public health emergency, which supersedes previous permit issues." Pete smiled grimly. Public health emergency requires documentation from the CDC and the State Health Department. You have neither. What you do have is a history of trafficking endangered species through shell companies. He held up a thick folder. "Thanks to some very dedicated internet research by young Emma here, we've compiled quite a file on your activities." Emma stepped forward, her laptop balanced in her arms. "I've been in contact with former employees of your research program, Dr. Morrison. They've provided evidence of illegal animal trafficking, falsified research data, and cruelty violations that would make your stomach turn." "A teenager with a computer is hardly a reliable source of—" Morrison began, but Emma cut him off. "What about Dr. Sarah Phillips from the University of Washington, or Dr. Marcus Chen from the National Wildlife Federation? They've both gone on record about your illegal activities." Emma's voice grew stronger with each word. "What about the shipping records that show rare animals being transported to private collectors in Dubai, Hong Kong, and Monaco?" Morrison's face had gone pale beneath his hazmat mask. "You don't know what you're dealing with, girl. There are powerful people who have invested significant money in this research. They won't let some sentimental story about a bear derail their operations." "What operations?" Sheriff Tom Bradley's voice cut through the night as his patrol car pulled up behind Morrison's convoy. "Wade, I've got arrest warrants here with your name on them. Federal warrants. Seems the FBI has been very interested in your activities." The animal control officers looked at each other uncertainly as Sheriff Bradley approached with 2 federal agents. Morrison's confident facade crumbled entirely as he realized his backup plan had failed. "Dr. Morrison," one of the FBI agents called out, "you're under arrest for wildlife trafficking, conspiracy, and violation of the Endangered Species Act. You have the right to remain silent." But Morrison wasn't listening. In a moment of desperate panic, he lunged toward Jack and Kodiak, perhaps thinking he could grab the cub and escape in the chaos. He made it exactly 3 steps before the mother bear moved with lightning speed that defied her massive size. The collision was spectacular and brief. Morrison went down hard, his hazmat suit tearing as he hit the ground with the full weight of a protective mother on top of him. She didn't maul him, she simply held him down with one massive paw while looking expectantly at the human authorities, as if to say, "Here's your criminal, do something about it." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Emma ran to her grandfather's side, wrapping her arms around both him and Kodiak. The little cub responded by gently placing his paws on Emma's face, a gesture so tender and human-like that several people in the crowd began crying. "Easy, Mama," Jack called to the bear, who was still pinning Morrison to the ground. "Let the law handle him now." The great bear looked at Jack for a long moment, then deliberately stepped back and allowed the FBI agents to take Morrison into custody. As they led him away in handcuffs, Morrison's parting words were filled with venom. "You have no idea what you've cost me, Jack. That bear was going to make me rich." "And that," Jack replied quietly, "is exactly why you never deserved him." As Morrison's convoy disappeared into the night, now led by federal agents instead of corrupt officials, the crowd of supporters gradually dispersed. Many stopped to thank Jack and Emma, and several made substantial donations to the rescue station. But the most meaningful moment came when Grace Mitchell approached with tears in her eyes. "Jack, what that bear did tonight, standing up to those men, protecting her baby and trusting us to do the right thing, it's going to change how people think about wild animals forever." Emma was already back on her laptop, updating the world about the night's dramatic events. #Save Kodiak was trending globally now, and the story of the mother bear who sought human help had captured hearts around the world. But as the last of the supporters drove away, leaving just Jack, Emma, and the two bears in the peaceful mountain evening, Jack realized that the real victory wasn't the legal one. It was the trust that had been built between species, the community that had come together for a cause greater than themselves, and the reminder that love and compassion could triumph over greed and corruption. Kodiak nestled against Jack's chest, making soft, contented sounds that seemed almost like purring. Outside, the mother bear had settled into her watching position, but her posture was relaxed now, peaceful. She seemed to understand that the immediate danger had passed. "What happens now, Granddad?" Emma asked, gently stroking Kodiak's fur. Jack looked at the cub in his arms, then at the magnificent mother bear who had started it all with her unprecedented act of trust. "Now we figure out how to honor the gift we've been given. This little one and his mama have taught us something about love that crosses every boundary we thought existed." The battle was won, but Jack had a feeling the real journey was just beginning. 3 days after Morrison's arrest, Jack believed the worst was behind them. Kodiak was healing rapidly, his playful personality emerging more each day. The cub had developed an endearing habit of following Emma around the cabin like a loyal puppy, and his bond with Jack had grown so strong that the old veterinarian found himself talking to the little bear the way he used to speak to Sarah, sharing his thoughts, his fears, his hopes for the future. The media attention had brought unexpected blessings. Donations poured in from around the world, enough to upgrade the rescue station's equipment and expand their capacity to help more animals. Wildlife organizations were calling to discuss partnerships. A publisher had even reached out about turning their story into a book. But on the 4th morning, Jack woke to an empty silence that sent ice through his veins. The clinic kennel where Kodiak slept stood open, its door hanging askew. The window above it had been carefully removed, not broken, but professionally extracted with tools that left no trace of forced entry. Emma's frantic voice echoed through the cabin as she searched every room, calling Kodiak's name with increasing desperation. "Granddad!" Emma's scream from the front porch brought Jack running. She stood frozen, staring at something in her hands, a note written on expensive letterhead from Morrison's company. "We have the bear. If you want to see him alive again, you will cease all media interviews, retract your statements to federal authorities, and transfer custody of the animal to our representative within 24 hours. Any attempt to contact law enforcement will result in the immediate termination of the subject. You cost us millions of dollars in contracts. The bear will pay the price for your interference." Jack's hands trembled as he read the words. The note wasn't signed, but the implication was clear. Morrison might be in custody, but his network was still operating, and they had Kodiak. Outside, the mother bear's anguished roar shattered the morning calm. She had returned from her nightly foraging to find her cub missing again, and her grief was primal, heartbreaking. She paced frantically around the cabin, sniffing at the ground where strange footprints led away into the forest, her massive frame shaking with rage and desperation. Emma collapsed onto the porch steps, tears streaming down her face. "They took him, Granddad. After everything we did, everything we fought for, they just took him in the night like thieves." Jack felt something fundamental breaking inside his chest. The same crushing sensation he'd experienced when Sarah died, when Michael was killed, when Emma's parents were lost. It was the feeling of being utterly powerless to protect the ones he loved most. "I should have seen this coming," Jack said, his voice hollow. "Morrison warned me there were powerful people involved. I was naive to think arresting him would end this." The mother bear's mourning grew more desperate as the morning wore on. She refused food, refused water, refused comfort. Her calls echoed across the mountain valleys, a sound so laden with grief that neighboring animals fell silent in respect. Grace Mitchell arrived around noon with a group of volunteers, but even their presence couldn't penetrate the shroud of despair that had settled over the rescue station. Sheriff Bradley came next, bringing FBI agents who examined the crime scene with professional efficiency. But their words offered little comfort. "These people are professionals. They knew exactly how to extract the animal without triggering alarms or leaving evidence. Without more leads, finding them will be nearly impossible." Emma had stopped crying, but her silence was somehow worse than her tears. She sat on the porch, holding Kodiak's favorite blanket, staring into the forest where his captors had disappeared. "He trusted us," she whispered finally. "He felt safe here, and we let them take him." As afternoon faded to evening, Jack made a decision that surprised even himself. He gathered Emma and the assembled volunteers on the porch, the mother bear sitting close enough to hear every word. "I'm not going to contact Morrison's people," Jack announced. "I'm not going to retract our statements or transfer custody rights. Those bastards think they can terrorize us into submission, but they're wrong." "Granddad, they'll hurt him," Emma protested, fresh tears starting to fall. "They're going to hurt him anyway," Jack replied grimly. "Men like Morrison don't keep promises to people they consider enemies. Our only chance of saving Kodiak is to find him ourselves." Grace Mitchell stepped forward, her elderly frame radiating determination. "What do you need, Jack?" "I need every favor you can call in, every connection you've made in 40 years of living in these mountains. Someone saw something, vehicles, lights, strangers in the area. These people had to have a base of operations, somewhere to take him." Emma looked up from Kodiak's blanket, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time all day. "The social media campaign. We can use it to crowdsource information. Thousands of people are following Kodiak's story now. If they're watching, someone might have seen something." Within hours, Emma's renewed online appeal had generated hundreds of responses. Hikers reported unusual vehicle activity near abandoned mining operations. A pilot mentioned seeing lights in an area that should have been empty wilderness. Local residents shared stories of suspicious trucks using logging roads in the middle of the night. But as the information poured in, Jack's heart grew heavier. Each lead seemed to point toward the same terrifying conclusion. Kodiak's captors weren't just hiding him. They were preparing to transport him out of the area, possibly out of the country entirely. The mother bear seemed to understand their urgency. She left her vigil by the cabin and began ranging farther into the forest, following scent trails that only she could detect. Her behavior became increasingly agitated, and Jack realized she had picked up Kodiak's trail. "She knows where they took him," Emma breathed, watching the great bear disappear into the darkening woods. "She's going after him." Jack felt a chill of premonition. A protective mother bear tracking her stolen cub would stop at nothing to get him back. If she found Morrison's people before the authorities did, the confrontation would be violent and possibly fatal for everyone involved. As night fell over the Olympic Mountains, two desperate rescue missions began simultaneously. The human authorities worked methodically through official channels, following leads and coordinating search efforts. But in the wild darkness of the forest, a mother's love was blazing its own trail toward a confrontation that would test every assumption about the boundaries between human and animal justice. Kodiak was out there somewhere, frightened and alone, unaware that two worlds, human and wild, were mobilizing everything they had to bring him home. The race against time had begun, and failure would mean losing more than just one small bear. It would mean the death of the extraordinary trust that had brought them all together. The abandoned mining facility sat like a wound in the mountain landscape, its rusted equipment and crumbling buildings hidden in a valley 20 miles from Jack's rescue station. Federal agents had been converging on the location for the past hour, following the trail of information that Emma's crowdsourced investigation had uncovered. But as Jack crouched behind a fallen log with Sheriff Bradley and two FBI agents watching the compound through binoculars, his heart hammered with a terrible certainty that they might already be too late. "I count at least 6 vehicles," Agent Martinez whispered, adjusting her scope. 3 semis with out-of-state plates, probably for transport. This isn't just about one bear cub, this is a major trafficking operation. Through the binoculars, Jack could see men in tactical gear moving between buildings, loading crates that were unmistakably animal transport containers. The scale of the operation was staggering. Dozens of cages, vehicles equipped for long-distance transport, and what appeared to be a makeshift veterinary facility for sedating animals before shipment. "There," Emma breathed beside him, pointing toward a small building near the center of the compound. "That window, 2nd floor. I saw movement." Jack adjusted his binoculars and felt his breath catch. In the dim light filtering through a grimy window, he could see the unmistakable silhouette of a small bear cub, motionless in what appeared to be a transport cage. "Kodiak," he whispered, the name carrying all the grief and determination of the past 4 days. Agent Martinez was already coordinating with her team through her radio. "We have visual confirmation of the target animal, beginning approach in 5 minutes. Remember, we need to take this facility intact. The evidence here could shut down trafficking operations across the entire Pacific Northwest." But as they prepared to move, a sound echoed across the valley that made everyone freeze, the unmistakable roar of an enraged mother bear. From the forest on the opposite side of the compound, the massive black bear emerged, her fur bristling with fury, her eyes fixed on the building where her cub was being held. "Oh God," Sheriff Bradley muttered. "She tracked them here on her own." The mother bear's appearance sent the trafficking operation into immediate chaos. Men shouted warnings and scrambled for weapons, but their preparations were focused on human threats, not a 300-pound maternal fury that had traveled 20 miles through treacherous mountain terrain to find her stolen child. The bear charged toward the compound with devastating purpose, her massive frame moving with surprising speed across the rocky ground. The first man who tried to stop her went down like he'd been hit by a truck. She barely paused, focused entirely on the building where Kodiak was being held. "Move now!" Agent Martinez commanded into her radio. "The situation is escalating rapidly." Jack watched in awe and terror as the mother bear reached the building. Instead of trying to break down the heavily reinforced door, she began climbing, her powerful claws finding purchase in the wooden siding as she hauled herself toward the second-floor window where Kodiak was imprisoned. The traffickers opened fire, but their shots went wild as they scattered in panic. This wasn't a scenario they'd planned for, and their careful organization dissolved into chaos as the mother bear reached the window and began tearing through it with her bare claws. From inside the building came a sound that made Jack's heart leap, Kodiak's distinctive call, weak but unmistakably alive. The mother bear's response was immediate and overwhelming, a roar of recognition and fierce protection that echoed across the entire valley. "They're sedating him!" Emma screamed, pointing at the window. Through the opening the mother bear had created, they could see men in the room attempting to inject something into Kodiak's transport cage. That's when the mother bear went through the window. The sound of splintering wood and terrified human screams filled the air as 300 pounds of protective fury entered the room where her cub was being held. The men who had been preparing to sedate Kodiak scattered, some diving through other windows in their desperation to escape. Jack was already running toward the building, ignoring the FBI agent's shouts for him to stay back. He reached the front entrance just as one of the traffickers came crashing through it, fleeing the bear's wrath with blood streaming from claw marks across his back. Inside, Jack could hear the mother bear's continued roars mixing with the sounds of destruction as she systematically destroyed everything in the room that threatened her cub. When he reached the second floor, he found a scene of complete devastation. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, and in the center of it all, the mother bear carefully extracting her cub from the twisted remains of his transport cage. Kodiak was alive but barely conscious from whatever drugs they had managed to give him before the mother bear's arrival. His small body was limp as his mother gently lifted him, and Jack could see fresh injuries from his captivity, rope burns around his legs, signs of dehydration, and a terrible listlessness in his usually bright eyes. "Easy, Mama," Jack said softly, approaching with his hands visible and empty. "I'm here to help him." The mother bear looked at Jack with eyes that held a mixture of fury and desperate hope. She gently lowered Kodiak to the floor, positioning herself protectively over him, while allowing Jack access to examine his injuries. "He's been drugged," Jack said, checking Kodiak's pupils and pulse. "Some kind of powerful sedative. We need to get him medical attention immediately." Emma appeared in the doorway, having followed her grandfather despite the danger. When she saw Kodiak's condition, fresh tears began flowing down her face. "Will he be okay?" "I don't know," Jack admitted, carefully lifting the semi-conscious cub. "But he's alive, and that's more than I dared hope an hour ago." As federal agents secured the compound and arrested the remaining traffickers, Jack carried Kodiak down the stairs with the mother bear following closely behind. The scale of the operation they had uncovered was staggering. Dozens of animals rescued, evidence of trafficking networks spanning multiple countries, and financial records that would lead to prosecutions across the illegal wildlife trade. But for Jack, only one thing mattered: the small, warm weight of Kodiak in his arms, and the deep, steady breathing that told him the cub was fighting his way back to consciousness. Outside the building, Agent Martinez approached with news that made Jack's heart sing with relief. "We've arrested 12 individuals and shut down what appears to be one of the largest wildlife trafficking operations on the West Coast. Morrison was apparently just a small part of something much bigger." As they loaded Kodiak into Jack's truck for the journey back to the rescue station, the mother bear took her position beside the vehicle, ready to escort her cub home. The extraordinary trust she had shown by bringing him to Jack in the first place had now been tested by fire and proven unbreakable. The long journey back to the mountain cabin began, carrying with it the promise of healing and the hope that some bonds truly are stronger than fear. 1 year later, Jack Sullivan stood on his porch with a steaming cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the Olympic mountains in shades of gold and rose. The scene before him would have been impossible to imagine just 12 months ago. Kodiak, now a robust yearling bear weighing nearly 100 pounds, was playing gently with Emma in the yard while his mother watched from her favorite spot beneath the old pine tree. The rescue station had been transformed beyond recognition. Thanks to donations that continued to pour in from around the world, Jack had expanded the facilities to include state-of-the-art veterinary equipment, spacious rehabilitation enclosures, and educational facilities that welcomed visitors from across the country. The Kodiak Wildlife Sanctuary, as it was now officially known, had become a model for ethical wildlife rehabilitation and a testament to the extraordinary bonds that could exist between humans and wild animals. Emma, now 17 and preparing for early admission to veterinary school at Washington State University, had become something of a celebrity herself. Her documentary about Kodiak's rescue had won awards at film festivals, and her advocacy work had led to significant changes in wildlife protection laws. But it was her daily relationship with Kodiak that truly showcased the miracle they had all witnessed. The bear treated Emma like a beloved sister, seeking her out when he was troubled, sharing his favorite treats, and even seeming to understand when she needed comfort. Their bond had been featured in National Geographic, studied by animal behaviorists, and celebrated by conservation groups worldwide. Yet for Emma, Kodiak was simply her friend, the brave little cub who had taught her that love truly knew no boundaries between species. "Still can't believe it sometimes," Grace Mitchell said, climbing the porch steps with her characteristic energy, despite her 71 years. "A year ago, we were fighting federal agents for the right to keep that little one alive. Now look at him." Jack smiled, watching Kodiak demonstrate his latest trick, carefully opening a puzzle box that Emma had designed to stimulate his intelligence. The bear's problem-solving abilities continued to astound researchers, but Jack had long since stopped being surprised by anything Kodiak did. The cub had been extraordinary from the moment his mother had trusted them with his life. "The documentary crew from BBC arrives tomorrow," Emma called from the yard, laughing as Kodiak successfully opened the box and immediately shared his treat with his mother. "They want to film the anniversary celebration." The anniversary celebration had grown beyond anything they had originally planned. What started as a simple community gathering to mark the day the mother bear had brought her dying cub to their door had evolved into an international event. Wildlife experts, conservation leaders, and families from around the world were coming to witness the remarkable family that had captured hearts globally. But it was the legal victory that Jack found most satisfying. Morrison's arrest had led to the unraveling of one of the largest illegal wildlife trafficking networks in North American history. Dozens of animals had been rescued and returned to their natural habitats. New legislation, dubbed Kodiak's Law, had strengthened penalties for wildlife trafficking and expanded protections for endangered species. Morrison himself was serving a 15-year federal sentence, his network destroyed, his reputation in ruins. "Dr. Sullivan?" A young voice interrupted Jack's thoughts. A group of children from the local school stood at the gate with their teacher, their faces bright with excitement. This was becoming a regular occurrence. School groups, families, researchers, and wildlife enthusiasts making pilgrimages to see the famous bear family. "Come on in," Jack called, gesturing them forward. "Kodiak loves meeting new friends." As the children approached, Kodiak immediately perked up with interest. Despite his size, he now stood nearly 4 feet tall on his hind legs. His demeanor remained gentle and curious. The mother bear watched calmly as the children gathered at a respectful distance, their teacher explaining the importance of wildlife conservation and the special trust that existed at the sanctuary. Emma began her practiced educational presentation, but Jack found his attention drifting to deeper thoughts. The year had brought changes beyond the physical transformation of the rescue station. He had found purpose again in ways he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. The sanctuary had become Sarah's dream realized, a place where broken creatures, both animal and human, could find healing. The financial success had been unexpected but welcome. Book deals, documentary rights, and speaking engagements had generated enough income to ensure the sanctuary's permanent operation. More importantly, Kodiak's story had inspired similar sanctuaries across the country, creating a network of safe havens for wildlife in need. "Granddad, look!" Emma's excited voice drew his attention back to the present. Kodiak had approached one of the visiting children, a shy little girl with glasses who had been hanging back from the group. The bear was gently offering her a pine cone, one of his favorite toys, with the same tender care he showed Emma. The little girl's face transformed with wonder as she accepted the gift, and Jack felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever he witnessed these moments of interspecies connection. This was what it was all about, not the fame or the money or even the legal victories, but these simple moments when barriers dissolved and love transcended every boundary that humans thought separated them from the natural world. As the school group departed, their excited chatter fading down the mountain road, Jack found himself alone with his unusual family. Kodiak had grown sleepy in the afternoon sun and was dozing with his head resting on Emma's lap while she worked on her college application essays. The mother bear maintained her watchful position, ever protective but completely at peace. "You know, Sarah," Jack said quietly to the photograph on the porch railing, "I think this is what you always meant when you said the rescue station would be about more than just healing animals. You knew it would be about healing hearts, too." A gentle breeze rustled through the pine trees, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the promise of another peaceful evening in their mountain sanctuary. Somewhere in the distance an owl called to its mate, and Kodiak stirred slightly in his sleep, making the soft, contented sounds that had become as familiar as Emma's laughter. The circle was complete. The desperate mother who had brought her dying cub to their door had given them far more than they had ever given her. She had reminded them that love, trust, and family came in forms they never expected, and that sometimes the most profound healing happened when you opened your heart to the impossible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rescues, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, in the gentle twilight of the Olympic Mountains, Jack Sullivan was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by the family that fate and one extraordinary mother bear had brought together. Sometimes life gives us second chances in the most unexpected ways. Jack Sullivan thought his days of purpose were behind him, a widower carrying the weight of loss, wondering if love could ever fill the empty spaces again. But when a desperate mother bear brought her dying cub to his door, everything changed. That moment of impossible trust didn't just save Kodiak. It saved Jack's heart from the slow death of isolation that so many of us face as we grow older. This story reminds us that family doesn't always come in the packages we expect. Sometimes it arrives wounded and wild, asking us to believe in miracles again. Jack discovered that opening his heart to the unexpected, to Emma's youthful energy, to Kodiak's innocent trust, to his community's rallying support, didn't make him vulnerable. It made him whole. The rescue station became more than a place for healing animals. It became a sanctuary for healing souls. At 62, Jack proved that our most meaningful chapters might still be unwritten. Love doesn't retire. Purpose doesn't expire. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to answer the call for help, we discover we're the ones being rescued. What unexpected source of joy has entered your life in recent years? Have you ever found purpose in helping someone or something that needed you most?